everyone, it's Sammy here, and it's time to do another thoughts video after having completed Head On. This will also cover Lost as well. I'll be talking about the PS2 version mainly, but we'll reference the PSP version where needed. As always, let's start with a history lesson, probably the longest history lesson yet. Head On is the 6th Twisted Metal game I got my hands on, and I originally got it on a PSP. Around the time of release was when I begun buying games on my own instead of always having them gifted to me by my sisters. I still haven't bought a single Twisted Metal on my own yet. When the PS2 version was announced, that would be the first Twisted Metal game I legitimately bought on my own, especially as I was very enthusiastic about the new content added to the PS2 port, particularly Lost. Head On is probably the one Twisted Metal game I've learned the most about from gaming websites prior to playing the game, including looking up game footage of it on places like GameSpot, becoming familiar with its prototype version when it was announced as Twisted Metal World Tour, and of course reading a guide on GameFAQs. I got Head On for the PSP I think for Christmas, and it was the first Twisted Metal game I ever played in its absolute entirety. All the other Twisted Metal games they had, either I played parts of them and stuck to certain characters, or I was using cheats and then played them legitimately. I may have played Twisted Metal Black of all characters in order to unlock Minion for instance, but that still involved using cheats to quickly get access to him, so I would say that I didn't really play Black properly until later. On the other hand, Head On had me playing through the game with every single character properly out of my own volition, as I wanted to unlock all the character endings, and at this point I stopped writing down cheat codes into a notebook. In fact, I would not use cheat codes in Head On until I got around to speedrunning the series, marking those runs the first time I'd used cheat codes when I played every other Twisted Metal besides Small Brawl with them at some point. It helped that the game was easy and reasonably paced, so going through the game routinely wasn't a problem. And therein lied the problem. Head On is too easy, even on hard difficulty. I remember a friend of mine in high school who would regularly bring his PSP to sneak in game time, and he noted that I liked the Twisted Metal series. He got Head On as his first ever Twisted Metal game and said it's too easy that he got bored. As I was primarily a single-player person who never really got into online until Call of Duty World at War came out during the Wii/PS3/360 era, online multiplayer was a foreign concept to me, which means it didn't even play the main selling point of Head On for the PSP, which was it being the first Twisted Metal game in a series to ship with an online multiplayer component right from the get-go. So I was left with a easy and somewhat unsatisfying single-player experience. The main difficulty primarily came from the mini-games, playing as ATV, and dealing with less buttons than on console due to muscle memory. When I heard Head On was a sequel to 2 and combining aspects from 2 and Black, I was highly ecstatic, even beyond the fact that I was an avid follower of the Twisted Metal series. The actual game may have qualities from 2 and Black, but gameplay-wise it was also lacking some of the cooler things from 2 and Black, leaving it as an okay successor to those 2 games at best, lacking the depth those 2 games had. A middle-of-the-road game overall. Still, I remain an avid Twisted Metal follower, and as mentioned before, I was excited for when Head On was ported over to PS2 with new content. The game was still easy, but with the weapons being even stronger than their PSP counterparts, and some changes to certain characters here and there, the experience still managed to feel fresh despite having played the PSP version extensively, and the inclusion of Transylvania was awesome. Never mind the Lost content, effectively adding a ton more vehicles and some extra levels on top of Transylvania. Around this time, I also dabbled in game guide creation on GameFAQs a bit, and PS2 version of Twisted Metal Head On is the first and last complete guide I've ever made for a video game. Even with me mostly criticizing Head On, I do appreciate what it was for me around this time. A portable Twisted Metal using the World Tour setting of 2 and the controls of Black, a comfort game due to its easy difficulty, and for me it is effectively the last real official Twisted Metal game. While 2012 released 4 years after Extra Twisted Edition, I wouldn't play the game till maybe 2 years after release, and the drastic overhauls to the series formula had soured me on that game when I did eventually play it, especially as I'll always reiterate, my preferred Twisted Metal is a single player experience with extensive unlockables and content to keep me occupied for a long while. So PS2 Head On and Lost are not a bad way to go out for a Twisted Metal series. Gameplay-wise, Head On is very simplified and has severe balancing issues. Special weapons have been nerfed in order to accommodate the upgrade system, and as a result, many specials feel samey instead of feeling unique to the vehicle just by lacking any sense of oomph to them or unique effects on hit in their base versions. Compounding this is the fact that Head On had dialed up homing ability weapons up to 11. Very few weapons have weak homing ability, and by default, All the other weapons that track their target are effectively undodgeable, guaranteed hits. The pickup weapons are unbalanced due to how dominant homing missiles are. 10 points of undodgeable homing for practically guaranteed damage is way too strong. For lower to medium arm vehicles, you're basically doing either a tenth or more of their HP per homing missile. Swarmers are also very strong, being essentially roadkill special from Twisted Metal Black made into weapon pickup, which is why even though the PS2 version of Head-On would make things even more unbalanced by buffing napalms and remote bombs, at least there were alternative, just as ridiculous weapon options. Head-On was also the beginning of removing instant death areas. This kind of makes sense for something like Monaco, where it will be easy for the AI to fall into the water and take themselves out of commission without your help. But making this the case for the rooftop map, where falling off was an instant death in past Twisted Metal games, just bites. It's very hard to fall out of the map on Tokyo rooftops due to a lot more guardrails and barricades, and leaving it at just having vehicles take boundary damage instead of dying instantly to falling off the map feels nonsensical. While I like that Head-On used the World Tour setting from 2, I feel the maps aren't as memorable as their counterparts from 2. They are all interactive and have their secrets, but I think that in the case of Head-On, perhaps it's a less is more approach. Twisted Metal 2 Los Angeles, for instance. Perfect. Great layout, relatively wide open while not being too big, and just spacious enough to give you room to engage in car combat with an enemy, or enemies. On the other hand, Head-On Los Angeles is much bigger than Twisted Metal 2's LA, and while its design is merely inspired by instead of being a one-to-one to the original LA, it doesn't feel as memorable as the original, perhaps because it's too big for its own good. Same for Paris. Russia in Head-On is probably a good example of a map that gets to stand out by being completely unlike its counterpart from 2. Moscow being a small dual-type arena using Russia as a setting, while Russia in Head-On is a larger map that has a lot more landmarks and areas but having a snowy theme with the same setting. Some of the maps and settings used in Head-On weren't used previously or have obvious counterparts, of course, such as Monaco, Greece, and Transylvania, so it's really a case-by-case basis. Still, I think Twisted Metal 2 did the World Tour setting best by making memorable levels that didn't have too much excess fat to them. Also, despite the PS2 obviously being stronger than the PSP, the game only allows a maximum of 5 enemies per level regardless of story or deathmatch, with the sole exception being the Tower Tube challenge. This makes for faster pacing overall, but it's quite strange considering that they could have easily programmed that aspect in if they wanted to, considering Twisted Metal Lost uses the same engine, but it has 7 enemies in all of its gameplay, so that's quite unusual, I think. The bosses aren't the greatest in Head-On. Cousin Eddie is a repeat of Twisted Metal Black minion, but far weaker and easier to deal with, and he's not that great in player hands either. He's got an amusing ending going for him, at the very least. Head-On would feature the second appearance of Darktooth, as well as officially make him playable, but despite being intentionally overpowered, he doesn't feel as intimidating as the Twisted Metal 2 original, and it does not help that he basically has a copy of Slam special. It does do great damage, a great combo potential for even more damage, plus it has a greater hitbox than is suggested, but it's still a Slam ripoff. Tower Tooth is a spectacle, being the largest and tallest vehicle in the series up to that point. This boss fight on PSP is difficult to do the legitimate way once you get to the head phase, where the special is a lightning plus cone barrage, while on PS2 it no longer fires the cones, which makes them routine and unengaging. This fight is interesting from a version differences perspective. On PSP, he can be locked into a repetitive movement pattern, which makes targeting him easier, though the cone barrage will still give you a big headache, while on PS2 you can be far more daring and aggressive since the lightning just amounts to tickle damage, but you'll have to deal with a more varied movement behavior, including Tower Tooth annoyingly running off to grab health like he was in Twisted Metal 3. On PSP, Tower Tooth is loaded as a separate level, so you'll have fresh health and pickups, while on PS2 it immediately loads Tower Tooth and you'll go into the fight with whoever your current health and pickup on the field situation is. I think reusing the smaller Tokyo Streets level for Tower Tooth probably didn't help. I would have preferred Tower Tooth having his own arena, while keeping the Twisted Metal 2 nostalgia to Darktooth in an Asian-themed battleground. Lastly, they removed the ability to combine weapons of energy moves, or being able to switch to another weapon during specials, with the sole exception being the napalm energy move, which was designed to be fired alongside any non-special weapon. While Black did this, You can still fire a freeze alongside Brimstone Special, for instance, which is already notable for not letting you to be able to switch to another weapon to use while it's active. Head-On does not allow for any of this at all. I really gotta wonder why they're allergic to fun stuff that was in previous Twisted Metals. It's meant to be akin to a fighting game, but in cars, and combining weapons of energy moves, or being able to use other weapons while a special is going off, helps give off that fighting game vibe. It also helps make characters stand out when they can develop strategies to synergize with their specials, such as Twisted Metal 2 Twister where mines and napalm while the enemy is caught in a tornado, or using power missiles or ricochets with Dumper while his flamethrower is going off to lock down the enemy's movement in order to keep them from being able to get away quickly from being torched. At most in Head-On, you get to plug the enemy with machine guns with another weapon going off, and that's it. If Harbor City was any indication, since Head-On's game systems were transferred over from that game, it seems like they already had this simplification of the car combat in mind, even before taking the PSP into consideration. Lastly, Head-On is quite buggy where the AI is concerned. They have this bug where they just randomly teleport with no rhyme or reason to it. This was less obvious on the PSP version where they didn't do this much, but on PS2 you can have them warp to the other side of the map, or even out of the map where you can't get to them. On Tokyo Streets, this is the only time it may be to their benefit, as they could warp to an out-of-bounds area and be caught in a perpetual falling loop where they'll eventually die. If they warp out of the map, you don't really have much choice but to start the level over. Head-On is still perfectly playable, but this particular bug is irritating to deal with. There are some things I do appreciate. The minigames are not the best idea for unlocking characters and levels, but they do add some variety to the game and are at least optional instead of mandatory. Head-On is like 4 in Small Brawl, where every single character and level is unlockable and playable, both in a single and multiplayer environment. It does have some of the black aspect I dislike in that some levels are just smaller versions of existing levels, and you also need to unlock levels that already are playable in story mode or modes outside of it. But apart from Tower 2 being restricted to a challenge level, there's no arbitrary restrictions otherwise. While I may give Head-On grief for being easy even on hard mode, the faster pace can be particularly cathartic after playing the Twisted Metals with annoying AI like 2, Black in 2012. Fights will never drag out when you can delete enemies within a short period of time, thanks to powerful basic weapons and the upgrade system giving you mega machine guns. Plus, an enemy limit of 5 to all levels means levels will only last as long as you deliberately choose to drag them out. I think Head-On's car physics and handling are perfect out of all the Twisted Metals. Vehicles are very controllable, especially on slides when using the tight turn button. They don't have instant acceleration like Black, so enemy movements are not jerky and twitchy, allowing you to attack them more accurately. And vehicle toppling is primarily due to specific weapons if they hit in a certain way, with only vehicles like Grim and ATV logically being vulnerable if bumped into due to small vehicle size and smaller vehicle body. Head-On for the PS2 is the first game to have jumps not cost any energy, which helps make them more useful as a utility and defensive option. The jump height is still similar to Black's until you get the jump upgrade that makes jump heights more similar to the PS1 TM games. Not the best way to go about it, but jumping being free is a good change. It's only in multiplayer where jumps costing energy would probably make sense to avoid abuse, though given that 2012 would also go with jumps not costing energy and expanded on it by making different jump heights for the vehicles, instead of them all jumping to the same height, it's a moot point. And finally, Head-On for the PS2 is the second and last time a Twisted Metal game would have built-in 60 FPS gameplay. All the other Twisted Metals besides Black and Head-On don't have 60 FPS, without some kind of code or program to force it into a game that didn't have it originally. It's not an absolute must for Twisted Metal to have 60 FPS, but 60 FPS generally means smoother gameplay, and both Black and Head-On for PS2 happen to be the two Twisted Metals with fast-paced car combat in terms of how they run. That's the most I could say about Head-On, which I generally consider to be a middle-of-the-road Twisted Metal game, as I mentioned previously. There's also Twisted Metal Lost, which comes packaged with the PS2 version of Head-On and is effectively an official, though incomplete sequel to Twisted Metal Black. Amusingly, despite Head-On taking after 2 and Black and positioned as a sequel to Twisted Metal 2, I'd honestly say Lost fits the sequel aspect better than Head-On as a sequel to 2 and Black. This is primarily in terms of the gameplay. All the levels feel closer to 2s in terms of not feeling bloated like head-ons. Scaling back in terms of size as well as the amount of pickups on the background. Head-on ensured you were stuffed to the brim of weapons, especially once you've gotten all the upgrades to the point that the upgrades begin giving you free missiles. In Lost, however, there's fewer pickups, and stronger weapon pickups like power missiles, napalms, and remote bombs only give you 1 per pickup as opposed to 2 in Head-On. The scarcity of weapon pickups helps give more value to the pickups as well as the areas they're located at, emphasizing map knowledge strongly. This also helps balance the weapons in a more indirect manner compared to Head-On, in addition to nerfing fire and homing missiles to do less damage than their Head-On counterparts, despite otherwise behaving the same. Ricochets are 2's bombs rather than Black's discs, which travel slowly and you can hurt yourself by running into them, and the knockback is fairly significant and noticeable. The vehicles are all taken from Black, of course, minus Minion, and while many of them retain their powerful specials, Lost sharing the same engine as Head-On, which attempted to bring some of the 2 flavor back, means that the Lost versions of Black's vehicles feel more 2-ified, so to speak. They all have higher base jump heights. Rams can do a fair bit of damage, particularly with the heavier vehicles, which can be helpful with how scarce weapon pickups are. And vehicle control changes means Lost vehicles are more weighty and have to deal with things like needing to accelerate to reach top speed, unlike Black. In Head-On and Lost, ramming also doesn't have the Black cooldown where after you bump into an enemy, there's a certain amount of time that must pass before you're allowed to ram them again to deal any kind of damage to them. It's possible to repeatedly bump into an enemy within a short time frame to deal random damage to them again in Lost, as well as Head-On. Distance still matters if you want to deal full random damage each time you do it, but while Head-On has lots of weapon pickups and a machine gun upgrade is a very effective fallback weapon to the point that rams aren't really emphasized as a gameplay element much, despite ram upgrades being a thing. In Lost, where there are fewer pickups and no machine gun upgrades, ramming being a fallback weapon for when you run out of weapons makes for a viable option with medium to heavy vehicles. Some vehicles have been upgraded from Black, some others got the short end of the stick. Warthog in particular has been struck with a nerf bad so heavily that he is easily the worst vehicle in the game. Someone like Brimstone, however, has been improved significantly, and he is much more fun compared to Black, thanks to the fact that you can switch weapons while his special is active, and you can either fire your next weapon very quickly or fire it after a short period of time, which allows you to combo his special into other weapons, and that is the one best possible change I could ask for Brimstone. And even though the game is very short, I appreciate them even bothering with adding small unlocks in the form of 12-pack, Gold Tooth, and Death Port. There's one thing I'm really bummed about, which is City of the Dead not being finished as a fully realized level. I remember reading David Jaffe's blog posts on Lost development, where he mentioned Lost will have about 4 to 5 levels, and the amount of levels in Lost pretty much matches. While I think Suburban Terror and Carnival of Darkness are good and Stadium Slaughter is okay, I love Deathport and City of the Dead essentially being similar to River Park Rumble from 1 and Downtown from Black also made it a favorite of mine. Yet with City of the Dead being incomplete, you get the awkward AI pathfinding behavior where they like to congregate in the center, spawn points where the AI might spawn in or on top of you instead of in different spots, and of course the level may crash. I would gladly give up Sweet Tour for more levels in Lost, as interesting as it was to get background development trivia and details of the Twisted Metal games, especially since this was the only chance a sequel to Black would manifest in some form, and the last chance we'd spend in either the Colorful or Black universes before 2012 rolled around. Overall, Head-On is a 6 out of 10, while Lost is an 8 out of 10. We will now move on to 2012, the very last official Twisted Metal game. Development on Update 3.0 for the Twisted Metal 5 fan game still needs more time to marinate, so I'll keep you guys occupied in the meantime. That's a gameplay and commentary, hope you enjoyed it, and Insanity is out.